Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for Employee Retention in 2021, Emerging Trends and Actionable Strategies. For those of you joining us on a webinar for the first time, MP is a full-service human capital management services company offering a suite of products and services including HR, payroll, benefits administration, time and attendance, and compliance. We support clients with cutting-edge technical solutions, as well as proactive, reliable service and deep HR and payroll expertise. MP is wired for HR and helps clients succeed by aligning their HR strategy with their business goals. I'm Carly Watson, the marketing specialist at MP, and I'm thrilled to introduce your presenters today. Amanda Leonardi and Sarah Speranza are SHRM-CP certified HR advisors at MP. Amanda currently provides HR support to businesses of all sizes and previously managed HR for a nonprofit organization. And Sarah provides HR support to businesses across many industries, and she assists business owners and managers in developing and implementing optimal HR infrastructure. If you'd like to submit a question during the program, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and a recording will be sent out later today following the presentation along with the slides. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic off to Sarah.
Thank you, Carly, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. I just want to start out with our usual brief legal disclaimer that though we will be talking about various employment laws today, this training is really for educational and informational purposes only, and we do not want to misconstrue any of this as legal advice. We always recommend that you speak with an employment attorney for any legal advice. With that being said, let's jump in. So for presentation topics that we're going to be covering today, we're going to start out with some top trends in employee turnover. We'll review some stats from the 2020 Achievers Engagement Retention Report, as well as some common trends we're seeing among our clients at MP. Then we'll discuss how to determine what's driving turnover in your company specifically. We'll review some tools and resources that will help enable you to establish the root of the issue for your population. This will include a quick overview of benchmarking, employee surveys, stay interviews, some 30, 60, and 90-day onboarding check-ins, as well as exit interviews. And then finally, we'll be delving into some actionable steps to improve employee retention. And that's where my coworker Amanda is going to jump on, and she'll be reviewing things such as refining your recruitment strategy, polishing your onboarding process, conducting compensation analysis, and much more. So about 1 in 4 US employees plan to leave their employer as the COVID-19 pandemic subsides. And that's according to a November 2020 survey conducted by Ipsos and on behalf of Eagle Hill. So what does that mean to us today? There are many factors that are bringing employee retention to the forefront right now, among them being the obvious ongoing pandemic and its effect on the workforce, putting the spotlight on low-wage essential workers and safety at work on the one hand, while building and managing remote workforces on the other. We also have to remember that employees leave organizations for all sorts of reasons, right? Though there will always be the instances of unavoidable attrition. Some go back to school, they move, retire, have childcare, personal or medical issues, etc. But what we're going to focus on today are the preventable reasons we see employees go and action items to correct for this within your organization. So while employers cannot control for 100% of turnover, we can create a workplace culture that encourages the best employees to stay and at the same time encourages what we call good turnover. So this takes some mindfulness and forethought, but it can definitely be done. And while there are some large and looming factors that are beyond our control right now, a comprehensive employee retention program can play a vital role in both attracting and retaining key employees, as well as reducing turnover and its related costs. So all these are going to in turn, of course, increase your organization's productivity and overall business performance. And as we all know, it's much more efficient to retain a quality employee rather than recruit, onboard, and train a new hire of the same quality. So what typically motivates employees to leave their jobs? Well, some of the more commonly cited reasons, and these are listed in no particular order because as we'll get into in the next few slides, it's a really complex question, and there's going to be a lot of factors that go into it at your organization. But what we see often are lack of career growth or lack of opportunities for advancement for reasons for employees moving on. We also see compensation and pay come up frequently as a top motivating factor. So some survey results show money as the biggest motivating factor, driving employees to seek other jobs. However, others show career growth to be the primary incentive. So it really just depends. According to Kent Plunkett, who is the CEO of salary.com, most studies report that employees leave their current jobs for better paying positions. And one of the best ways to combat turnover is to ensure that pay in your organization is both externally competitive and internally equitable. So this can be a big project, but is definitely doable. They say that the average increase in compensation for a worker who quits one job for another is about 15%. And Amanda's going to dive more into this in the later slides, talking about the specifics of how to outline a compensation analysis within your business and what that looks like. We also see employees leaving due to lack of recognition or appreciation as a motivating factor. That can come from unappreciative or flat out demanding management, which can lead to quicker burnout and employee dissatisfaction. Another common thing we see is rigid or unpredictable scheduling. So that's where workplace flexibility comes in. More and more employees are seeking the flexibility and a healthy work-life balance. And then we get into relationship management. So basically, the trust between employees and senior management, and whether that's there, is there transparency between the two, is there open communication, things like that. When that is missing, it tends to drive employee turnover. And then finally, the culture or respectful workplace. We see that it's important that employees are in an environment free of harassment and a place where they're not only allowed to be their true selves, but are celebrated for bringing their whole selves to work. So workers are quitting their jobs in record numbers. And the graph we see here is charted from 2010 to 2018. So in 2000 is when the Bureau of Labor Statistics began recording what's known as the quits rate. And as of 2018, the number of employee quits had increased for 9 consecutive years, and that trend has just continued. So the last time the voluntary quit rate was as high as it is now was in April of 2001. Furthermore, the total annual separations level has increased from 66 million in 2018 to 67 million in 2019, which is again another series high. So with that in mind, we're going to talk a little bit about why it's different in 2021. Obviously, we know the pandemic has caused a lot of changes. So we were already on an upward trajectory when it comes to employee quit numbers, and then the pandemic hit. According to a 2021 Bureau of Labor Statistics report, the turnover rate in 2020 was at 57.3%. And as we all know, with the pandemic causing seemingly constant changes and upheaval, one of which being massive layoffs and subsequent unemployment assistance. So while we've all heard a lot of the rhetoric around employees not wanting to work, there are also some interesting things that have emerged and some other factors to consider. So this time away from low wage or demanding jobs in conjunction with some unemployment assistance has actually provided some flexibility for employees. And what we see that's happening is some real reflection about whether or not they're in roles that they want to be doing, that they're finding fulfilling, or where there might be more opportunity for them to expand their skills, make more money, that kind of thing. And I think especially with the threat of COVID in the background, it's just really making people think overall. And so many of these employees have found time to upskill, maybe start a business, just reassess in general, and plan a new path forward. Furthermore, with the year of remote work, it's also made it a lot easier for companies to court talent and for other companies to court yours. So before the last year, it would have been really difficult, if not impossible, to imagine a hiring scenario where you would bring on a six-figure executive without ever personally meeting them. But as we all know, that's become the norm in the COVID era. So beyond that, when it comes to remote work, studies have also proven that employees would leave their current on-site jobs for an employer with more flexibility and remote work available. Additionally, or kind of the flip side of that, is those that are in remote roles now are also seeking greener pastures due to burnout, expectations of being on 24/7 from home, and just the inability of their employer to maintain and build a company culture remotely. So where do we go from here? Well, we need to build people strategies that are every bit as sophisticated and complex as those we have for things like technology, sales and marketing, finance, and so on. So we're going to get into the breakdown of the numbers a little bit before we have Amanda dive deeper into those action plans. Here we have a chart from the research commissioned by the Achievers Workforce Institute. And basically what they're showing here is that of those considering changing jobs in 2021, about 36% are seeking better compensation and corporate benefits, while about 25% are after a better work-life balance. And we see 16% wanting more recognition or appreciation in their work. So those are the three primary factors. And then you'll see a smaller breakdown of things like corporate culture, company values, relationships among their peers within the organization. And so this, just to provide some clarifying background, was done on a group of 2,000 employed adults. So these are people who are currently working. And it was done in February of 2021. It also found overall that 52% are looking for a new job, and that is up from 35% a year earlier. The study also found that 46% of respondents feel less connected to their company, and 42% say company culture has diminished since the start of the pandemic, unfortunately. Just 21% say they are very engaged at work. So now we're going to switch to top factors in job satisfaction. Now that we've gone over some of the reasons employees are leaving, I want to touch on reasons that make them stay. So while you would think it would be the same, it's not always. And then it can also, the factors can come in a different order for what makes people stay versus makes them leave. So this is according to the Society for Human Resources Employee Job Satisfaction and Engagement Survey. And so while they find that fairness and transparency are fundamental and powerful concepts that make a lasting impression on employees, they have identified these 5 leading factors that contribute to job satisfaction. So the first is the respectful treatment of all employees at all levels. So, across the very entry level workers right up to the executive C-suite level. And then compensation pay, as we have already talked about, that is a big one. Although, it tends to be that when employers get that piece right is when the other factors become more important. The third is trust between employees and senior management. The fourth being job security. The fifth, opportunities to use their skills and abilities at work. And so the importance of addressing these factors is obvious, but actually doing so definitely takes time. And these tasks are often kind of pushed off, left to another day. Can be hard to make the room in your busy schedule to do these things. However, the payoff for focusing on employee retention in terms of increased performance, productivity, employee morale, quality of work, and reduction in both turnover and employee-related problems can be well worth the time and definitely the financial investment. So let's talk a little bit more about the specifics of what is driving turnover within your organization. As we kind of touched on before, drivers of turnover are going to be really unique to your industry and organization, and there are a multitude of factors to consider. So I think the pandemic has really brought this to the forefront for a lot of industries, a lot of employers and workers, et cetera. So your industry or your work environment and safety protocols that you have in place are really going to have a big impact, right? So if employees aren't feeling safe in their day-to-day interactions or at work, then everything else is going to kind of fall by the wayside. And a similar status is given to pay or compensation as well. So basically, you can kind of use your industry to figure out what the standards are when it comes to pay, and then decide if you might be able to afford to be a leader when it comes to that. We would also look at workforce demographics. So are your employees on site? Are they remote? Do they fall primarily into blue collar or white collar workforce segment? Do you have a mixture of both? Are you experiencing turnover across your organization, or is the problem primarily focused within one department or one job category where you just see a constant turnover, and then really delving in and focusing on those areas? So the need to consider all of these factors comes from complexities of how each will interact with the other to determine what is most pressing for your employees right now. So for example, studies find that fulfillment often becomes important after the pay is right. Because there's no one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to employee retention, we need to best utilize the tools at our disposal to find some answers and begin making changes. So next, we're going to review the tools to establish the root of the issue. And some of the most effective ones for this can include benchmarking, employee surveys, and stay and exit interviews. So let's dive into each of those a bit more. Well, what is benchmarking? Basically, establishing appropriate benchmarks, both external and internal, is a key first step to preparing to implement an employee retention strategy. It gives you an idea of a starting point and a place to measure success from. So we first suggest taking a look at external benchmarking. For example, is 15% annual turnover rate too high for your company? This is going to be a question that's impossible to answer in isolation, right? So you're going to need to benchmark this against the competitors in your industry. And that's going to provide some really valuable information for determining whether you have a turnover problem within your organization, and kind of what next steps you can take about that. You'll also find annual and monthly quit rates as a percentage of total employment across the US, and you can find this broken down by industry, geographic location, and sector on the Department of Labor Bureau of Labor Statistics website. So we'll be providing a bunch of resources at the end of the presentation, and you'll get the slide deck so that we'll link through to these if you want to start doing some benchmarking for your organization. And then we also want to consider the internal benchmarking. So this is a way for your organization to both track its turnover rate across time and look for any patterns. So if the rate increases overall among particular groups, it can be a red flag that a problem might exist in that area. And then we also have sample turnover cost calculation spreadsheets that can help you track these things over the year. Tracking things like annual voluntary turnover rates, involuntary turnover rate, a high employee turnover rate, high performer turnover rates, promotion and transfer rates will all give you a baseline. It can help you measure the success of your retention programming that you're going to implement moving forward. So once we have an idea of where we stand, within the industry and the workforce in general, we can then kind of dive deeper into what's going on for our specific employee population. And that's where employee surveys can come into play. You can really stay up to date on ever-changing employee attitudes and keep a pulse on what matters most to your employees. So attracting, retaining, training, rewarding employees, they all have to reflect a clear understanding of the employees who make up your workforce. And employee surveys are a great vehicle for gaining that insight. So conducting one of these surveys correctly, though, it can take a lot of work and months of preparation to have this go properly. So we'll kind of just quickly go over the pros and cons of conducting employee surveys just to see if it's right for your organization right now. So the pros will be that a really carefully designed and conducted survey can reveal a lot of information about employees, their perceptions about the workplace, and kind of how management can use that to improve. And the organization being responsive to this employee feedback can lead to things like higher retention rates, lower absenteeism, improved productivity, better customer service, improved employee morale, all good things, all the stuff we want to see. And just the survey can also send the message that you care what your employees think and want to actively work to hear their contributions. We will say on the flip side of that, the con can be that if the senior management is not fully committed and ready to listen, and most importantly, act on some of the changes or things that employees are saying, then conducting a survey can actually lead to some really poor morale problems. So we cannot stress this enough. If your team is not ready to take action on what you're going to find out in the employee survey, we definitely suggest holding off until there is a good time where you feel that you'd be able to address and really take the time to thoughtfully work through whatever feedback your employees have to provide to you. So then what type of surveys do you want to conduct? Again, this is going to come back to the goals that you are setting within your organization, right? So the three most common you're going to see are the employee opinion and satisfaction surveys, as well as employee culture surveys and employee engagement surveys. And then another factor you want to consider is the timing and frequency of your surveys. So organizations should conduct surveys with employees on a regular basis. Most companies elect to ask their employees what's going on an annual basis to get their feedback. And then you also want to take a few other things into consideration, like avoiding peak holidays or trying to schedule it when you have a slow time for your business. That way you ensure maximum participation. And finally, it's good to avoid conducting the survey during cycles that could skew the results positively or negatively. So for example, you probably don't want to have the survey go out right during employee bonus season, or on the flip side of that, during really high stress periods. So all things to consider when you put these surveys out. And then the last thing we'll want to consider is survey design. So best practice recommends you keep it short and simple and avoid kind of double-barreled questions. And that is meaning when you group two questions into one, for example, you're going to want to avoid doing things like asking them to rate the pay and benefits are excellent at this company. So when you group those two together, you'll have no way of knowing if it's actually the pay or the benefits that the employees really value within your organization. And so it won't really yield the useful statistics that you're looking for and enable to help managers come up with a follow-up action plan. So next we recommend some onboarding check-in meetings, and we kind of would suggest that you consider doing these at 30, 60, and 90-day intervals for your new hires. If this is just like, something that would be way too overwhelming and not possible, I would definitely suggest trying it out with just one. So for instance, maybe a 90-day check-in, and then if you're able to increase it from there. So starting small is always best, and a key first step to ensure that ongoing conversations are happening both at regular intervals and spontaneously when they're needed. So the easiest way to engage new hires and ensure they stay on track would be to implement these conversations at these 3 points, the 30, 60, and 90-day marks. And you could try initiating these meetings with some example questions. For example, in your 30-day one-on-one follow-up, you would include things like, what do you like most about the job and the organization so far? You can ask your employees what's been going well as what hasn't been going so well, and how you can improve their experience thus far. Other things like, have they had any surprises, or, could you have done anything different in the interview process to more realistically prepare them for this role? At 60 days, you'll want to cover things like, do you have enough work to do? Is there too much, too little? Do you have the appropriate tools and resources you need? And how do you see your job relating to the organization's mission and values? And then finally, at the 90-day check-in, you can delve into things such as which coworkers may have been particularly helpful in their onboarding process. The goal to asking questions like this is to kind of pinpoint employees that can be influential in retaining your new hires and mentoring. Furthermore, you could ask questions like, does your supervisor clearly explain what's expected of you? And you could find tons of questions like this. We'll link some resources at the end, but there are some really good guides out there to kind of walk you through what's important to ask at each stage. And then just at the completion of the check-in, you want to be prepared to address any shortcomings in individual performance or organizational challenges that may be hindering productivity. It typically doesn't take much time. They don't have to be long meetings, and you can kind of head off some problems proactively and show some strong leadership and communication skills. Moving to stay interviews. So stay interview is a proactive means of retaining top talent as well. And there are 5 primary questions you want to ask when conducting a stay interview, following them all up by probing questions, and you'll kind of get the information you need to develop individualized engagement and retention plans that will really work for the employee you're looking to keep. So question 1 would be, what do you look forward to each day when you commute to work? 2 being, what are you learning here and what do you want to learn? 3, why do you stay here? 4, when is the last time you thought about leaving us and what prompted it? And then 5, what can I do better as a manager to in turn make your job better for you? So those are kind of the recommended questions. And then, like I said, do some probing questions from there. And what we recommend most when it comes to interviewing is kind of the general rules for interviewing in any sense, right? You want to listen 80% of the time. You don't want to do most of the talking, which can be the downfall for some in interviewing. And then you want to take notes so that you are sure to capture key points, and you can follow up on these things and make an action plan essentially. So finally, I'm going to touch on exit interviews. And I thought this cartoon really touches on kind of the humor of exit interviews at time being a little too late. So perhaps if you'd opened up these questions in onboarding or stay interviews, you might not have ever gotten to the point of an exit interview. But still, these can be really effective tools and kind of serve as an opportunity for you to learn more about an employee's reasons for leaving the company, which can provide you with important feedback that you can use to improve the workplace and help future new hires. So the other thing about exit interviews is also kind of a way to have a positive impact on boomerang hires, meaning those who leave your organization to return at a later date. It can be a good way to keep communication open, invite strong talent to keep you in mind should things change down the road. So some important questions you're going to want to ask here are things like, why are you choosing to leave? What did the company do right versus what do you feel the company did poorly? How can we improve as an organization? And do you have any specific thoughts about your manager or department you work in? Are there any ideas you wish you would have been able to implement during your time here? And then maybe any advice they would have for a new person coming into their position with the company. There's also handfuls of do's and don'ts for exit interviews. So we'll just touch on these very quickly. I will say, when you are doing an exit interview, be sure you prepare in advance. Typically, it's best practice to have a written survey. So you're asking all the same questions to each employee. And then they have the opportunity to really think and reflect on the questions before you have the conversation with them. When you do have the conversation, just make sure you're going in free of distractions, and also make sure the employee knows why you're doing the exit interview. Some people can be intimidated by them, so just making sure they know it's really to help the organization improve, and that's what you're looking for. And then let's see, when you're done with the exit interview, some ways that you can leverage the information would be, obviously sharing the relevant information with appropriate managers or people within the company. You can create a spreadsheet based on, once you've had or implemented exit interviews for a while, you'll have some data to look at. So if you're tracking it all in the spreadsheet, you'll be able to look at some trends and go back and address them in that manner. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to start talking to you about some actionable steps you can take.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. And hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. So now that my friend and coworker Sarah has enlightened you on how to uncover what the root of your retention struggles are, we next wanted to give you some tools to help you resolve those common issues and ultimately improve your retention strategies moving forward. All right. So actionable steps. We could take this in a million different directions, but I had to put my blinders on today and focus in on what I wanted to take a look at, 3 main functional areas surrounding how you can address retention issues and formulate retention strategy. The first is performing an analysis. Then we're going to jump into management training. And then last but not least, we're going to discuss some things that you and your leadership team can do day in and day out that will ultimately lead to, retention of your top talent. All right. So a critical element to formulating a retention strategy is performing an analysis. And you should really be performing an organizational analysis on an annual basis under normal circumstances. But given, the state of the world over the past year and a half, now could not be a more important time to analyze and take a look at your employee engagement and retention. Whether you are an employer who has employees on site or an employer who has adopted a remote work environment during the pandemic or a hybrid model, the last year has really forced every company's hand into organizational change essentially overnight. And many companies were and still are trying to stay afloat. And of course, that was and is top priority. However, as things begin to hopefully taper off, it's time to take a step back and gain perspective on how all of the changes over the past year have impacted your employees, impacted company culture, and impacted the ability for you to retain your top talent, especially now in a piping hot job market. So it's time to embrace the idea that business strategy and workforce planning will look different post-pandemic. And to get started on identifying what will make you as an employer, become an employer of choice, as well as what will be necessary for your team to prosper once, this health crisis passes. And in order to build out that strategy, you really have to do an analysis. So when we are talking about performing analysis, we're talking about analyzing a variety of aspects of your business. And Sarah mentioned earlier, soliciting feedback from your employees will help you prioritize, which areas of the organization need to be analyzed first, because, it's going to differ on an employer by employer basis. So one area that you may have to take a look at is your hiring process. And this is a really common struggle that we're seeing when it comes to employee retention. New hires have weak ties to the organization. So it's much easier for them to leave than someone who's been with the organization for a longer period of time. So you really want to refine your hiring process from start to finish to ensure new hires are feeling invested and integrated in the organization from the jump. So first, you're going to take a look at your recruitment strategy. Many companies lately have been so quick to hire employees because they have had vacancies that needed to be filled like yesterday. So, they're expediting the hiring process. However, I've learned, as most HR professionals have learned, it's never better to just have a warm body in the role. You want to find the right fit for not only the position, but also the organization. So take time to build out a recruitment strategy. How are you going to build a pipeline of top talent? Where are you going to advertise? What types of attractive buzzwords and language are you going to use in your job postings? So often we see employers, just posting the job description on job boards, but that's a missed opportunity. You have the ability to engage candidates and establish buy-in from moment number one with your job postings. Make the posting fun and intriguing and capture your company culture in the posting so that people recognize that you're a great employer to work for and are going to provide them with, something that they can't get elsewhere. So, keep in mind that all candidates approach choosing a job with the what's in it for me mindset. So be sure you capture their attention from the start. You also want to hire for culture, not just skills. People can, bring their skills anywhere. What's more important is that they're a cultural fit. Skills can be taught. Cultural alignment is more innate. So if new hires feel connected and engaged in your culture from the start, you have a better chance at longevity. You also need to establish a strong onboarding process. There is data upon data upon data that shows that the first 6 months of employment is critical to long-term success. And the vast majority of new hires decide whether or not to stay with the company long-term in the first 6 months of their employment. And many companies out there have onboarding programs that address the first week of employment, and that's it. However, in reality, onboarding really needs to last as long as 6 months to a year after the employee's hire date. And last but certainly not least, help new hires make connections as quickly as possible. This, may seem inferior to the other bullets on this slide, but I would argue that it might be the most critical. Many employees, stay at jobs solely based on the people that they work with. So help your new hire build connections with the team so that they feel like they have people other than their supervisor to rely on. They trust that the team you built has their back, and they feel like they're, making friends at work. You also need to set realistic expectations. As we talked about, turnover trends are highest among new hires, often because, the job doesn't match their initial expectations. So once they experience what they perceive to be the downside of a job, they quit. And the solution is to, expose potential candidates to the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to the job, so they know what they'll be doing and have an accurate representation of that before they accept the offer. And this really starts with accurate and transparent job descriptions. It's important to set realistic expectations in those. What are the essential functions of the job? Is there flexibility to work from home in this role? Does this position need to be, vaccinated? Will the job look like what they picture day to day? You want to have all of this well laid out so that the applicant can paint a picture in their mind of what a day in the life looks like. You also want to be transparent about the work environment. Maybe, for example, you're a manufacturing company and the factory is hot and noisy. Walk potential candidates through the workspace during the hottest and loudest part of the day. Is it difficult to take time off in the organization? Make that clear to applicants. Employers tend to rush into to fill a job when, with the first decent candidate, which can result in a poor fit and need to fill the position repeatedly. So be open and honest about what the work environment really looks like. And then, as we talked about, hire for culture, not just skills. Make sure the person is a good fit for the organization. Be transparent about what the company culture is like. Get feedback and testimonials from your employees, asking them to describe the work culture in 3 to 5 words and convey those themes to employees. So you just want to be transparent and do everything you can to help set realistic expectations so that people aren't disappointed upon hire. Okay, so compensation and benefits. So Sarah touched upon this earlier, and it's not always the top reason why someone leaves a company. However, without fail, it's always in the top 3 reasons. It's very important to people. So you definitely want to keep an active pulse on this. And each year you should really be doing a compensation analysis to ensure that you're up to snuff and in line or better than your competitors through benchmarking. And when you're analyzing your comp strategy, you'll want to strive to nail down the following objectives. So you want to identify the organization's pay programs and total reward strategies. So you want to have a framework to this. Also want to identify how the pay programs and strategies support the organization's business strategy. So anything that you analyze and implement should always link back and support the organization's business strategy without fail. You also want to make sure that it motivates employees to perform at the best of their competencies and their skill set. You want to make sure that what you're implementing and analyzing is, setting you up to retain your key talent and reward, employees for high performance. And you also want to, define the competitive market position of the organization in comparison to your competitors when it comes to base pay, incentive compensation, benefits opportunities. So again, compensation analysis is separate than a benefits analysis. So you want to do the same type of information gathering for your benefits. Take a look at your PTO programs, your health insurance offerings, your retirement benefits, your disability insurance, employee assistance programs, educational assistance programs, and see how those offerings stack up to your competitors. Bonuses, maybe you typically provide bonuses, but due to the pandemic, you weren't financially able to make that happen last year. Or maybe you don't typically provide bonuses, but would like to thank your employees for all of their hard work over the past year. Now might be a great time to provide folks with a little bit of bonus pay. Also, during the pandemic, many employees have put their health and their family's health potentially at risk by going to work every day. So you may want to consider providing hazard pay to employees to show thanks and recognize that they could be putting a lot on the line to show up at work. And then take a look at your employee discounts. So discount programs provide, employees with relatively low cost benefits to you. And if employees can save, 10 to 20%, it helps. Discounts are, typically on the lower end of the totem pole in comparison to the other areas of their total compensation package. But again, any gesture helps. Okay, so you also need to do an analysis and build strategy around how you're going to invest in your employees. Companies should identify and engage high performers in development opportunities for obvious reasons, but not only, top performers or A players, you still want to ensure that there are career paths for all. So be sure you have viable, appealing career paths that are visible to all employees. Create transparency around it and a realistic framework for success. Even so with your part-time workers or maybe your remote workers. So make sure that you are making career pathing available and visible to all. One of the top reasons people change jobs is career progression. And, if you're wondering how to keep these employees engaged, be sure you're offering meaningful opportunities to grow within the company. Also consider instituting a mentorship program. So this is a great engagement technique. Mentorship programs inherently make employees feel as though they're being invested in. There is no more intoxicating feeling being an employee in the workforce as there is when you feel like your employer recognizes your potential, is investing time, energy, and resources into your long-term development and integration into the fibers of the organization. And it doesn't have to be something where you have, mentorship meetings every day or every week. Mentors and mentees can meet once a month, and, this will certainly still provide value. You also want to keep ongoing learning and development opportunities available to your employees. In this remote environment, for those of you who are, working in a hybrid model or a completely remote model, keep in mind that you will likely need to adapt learning and development programs to embrace remote workers. So, make sure your web-based courses or instructor-led courses or on-the-job trainings are accessible virtually and tracked for all learners. And a really great way to do this is by implementing a learning management system. When it comes to learning and development opportunities, you really need to establish, a cadence to determine at what frequency you're going to be providing these opportunities. And research shows that, a monthly or bi-monthly basis produces the highest levels of engagement. So all in all, a clear career trajectory with guidance on how to achieve goals is something current employees really look for in a company. And if you don't invest in them, how can you expect them to invest in you? Okay, company culture is another very common cause behind employee turnover. And this is probably the area of the business that employees are most directly impacted by every day, and the area of the business that employees connect to the most. So you really have to take a time to focus and invest in fostering a positive and unique company culture. I remember when I was an applicant and a new employee, the company culture at MP was palpable and was one of the main reasons why I chose to come work for MP. So that was something that was really important and continues to be really important to me to this day. Keep in mind with the shift in the workforce over the past year for remote employees, company culture is, primarily communicated through interactions with their immediate coworkers and managers. So it's really important to create a supportive environment, from the beginning, and make sure that company culture isn't falling by the wayside in a remote world. With all that being said, here's some data. The proof is in the pudding. So according to the Achievers Workforce Institute report, which we will provide you a link to in the references, 2/3 or 66% of employees would be more engaged at work if employers improved their company culture, while more than half, or 52%, would be more engaged if their employer improved its diversity and inclusion. So now is the time to focus on company culture, and this is data from 2021. So I was reading an article in Forbes that said the unexamined culture is a potentially dangerous thing, and that hit home. Words could not be truer. There's a strong correlation between workplace culture, satisfied and engaged employees, as well as business productivity and profits. And when an organization's culture is toxic, everyone loses. Toxic workplaces are the primary reason why workers quit their jobs, and the impact is felt so deeply that you, as business leaders, really do need to pay attention to that. Keep in mind, even if you feel like you had a top-notch company culture pre-pandemic, some things may have shifted and fallen by the wayside over the past year. So you really want to look inward and do an honest assessment of your company culture. I've been helping several of my clients with engagement surveys lately, and two of the questions that we've been incorporating are open-ended culture questions. So the first is, what 3 to 5 words would you use to describe the current culture of the organization? And the second is, what 3 to 5 words would you use to describe the ideal culture of the organization? So through asking these questions, you get a pulse check on how employees currently view your culture and what employees would ideally like to see your company culture evolve into. And that helps you set focus on some of the cultural shifts that you can make from there. So you really have to gain an understanding of the common traits found in the business in order to establish, your cultural strategy. So identify common traits. Who are we? What makes us who we are? Organizations that decide that, you know, where they are now is not where they want to be may need to look at moving the organization, you know, to embrace a different culture. And if that's the case, you want to open a dialogue with your team. So, you know, convene focus groups of employees that has representation from all levels, all functions, and all locations of the organization, so that you can accurately assess the validity and, you know, significance of the culture traits. You know, then you want to kind of put your money where your mouth is and summarize the findings, share them with, you know, all participants to solicit additional insight, and then create your culture management action plan. So the plan should really enhance traits that support corporate growth or organizational effectiveness, and correct traits that might hinder a company's advancement and hinder the overall company culture. You then need to practice what you preach. So make sure management actions don't clash with stated values. You know, if the executives are not walking the walk, employees will not be inspired to do so either. You also want to develop metrics around company culture. So, you know, particularly with management, make sure you're creating metrics and holding them accountable with alignment to your company culture. Supervisors, you know, can really make or break your culture, and they're the day-to-day representation of the organization in front of your employees. So you want to be sure to communicate your cultural expectations and hold them accountable to align with those expectations and behaviors. And managers in turn should do the same with their employees. It should trickle down. And in your assessment of your culture, you really need to take an honest, hard look at whether your workplace is one that creates an inclusive and respectful environment for all. You know, one of my favorite phrases when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion is diversity is inviting the person to the party, and inclusion is asking them to dance. So you want to make sure that you're asking everyone to dance. You know, in addition, you want to celebrate employees' differences and ensure that your entire team is doing so as well. So, you know, doing an annual unconscious bias training, diversity, equity, and inclusion training is an HR best practice, so that you can help all employees check their blind spots, which is an essential function of being able to cultivate a workplace that lives and breathes inclusion. And then lastly, build ties that unite. So the best employee retention practices are those that uniquely reinforce, you know, a business culture that celebrates and unites employees, whoever they are and wherever they work. So it doesn't need to be something that's grandiose. An example that I really liked was Zappos. They have their team nominate one another. So coworkers nominating one another for $50 monthly bonuses. And, you know, this is a relatively small gesture, but it helps coworkers build bonds and appreciate one another in more than just words, which can go a long way. All right, another retention technique is to establish values and really lean into them. So one of the people who inspires me most on the planet is a woman named Brené Brown, who I'm sure that many of you have heard of and are familiar with. She is a research professor that has dedicated her life's work to studying courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy. And she's written many books, one of which is called Dare to Lead. And this book takes her research and it applies it to the workplace, and it's been wildly successful. And it's really an ultimate playbook for developing brave leaders and courageous company cultures. So I encourage everyone to check it out at some point. But I wanted to read you an excerpt from the book surrounding what she and her team of researchers found during their study surrounding company core values. She says, one reason we roll our eyes when people start talking about values is that everyone talks a big values game, but very few people actually practice one. It can be infuriating, and it's not just individuals who fall short of the talk. In our experience, only about 10% of organizations have operationalized their values into teachable and observable behaviors that are used to train their employees and hold people accountable. If you're not going to take the time to translate values from ideals to behaviors, if you're not going to teach people the skills that they need to show up in a way that's aligned with those values, and then creates a culture in which you hold another accountable for staying aligned with values, it's better not to profess any values at all. So more of the story is, if you're going to establish values, you need to lean into them. You need to embody them. You need to walk the walk every day. You need to explicitly teach and show employees the behaviors you want to see. And Have no fear, because that feels like a little bit of a overwhelming task, but have no fear. The great Brene has created some resources to help you accomplish this. So she created a step-by-step process for groups and teams to, create shared language and commitment to a set of behaviors that align with your core values. And we will be providing you with links to these resources in the resource page. So I highly, highly recommend you check them out. They're really good toolkits. And in addition to a step-by-step guide of how to accomplish this, she also provides an example of how you can create an outline to make your values and expected behaviors more visible and teachable to your team. All right, let's move on to management training. I know we are racing the clock a little bit here, so I'll make it quick. So managers are really, as we talked about, the face of your organization. And so you really need to train managers in order to ensure that they are putting their best foot forward to employee retention techniques. So you really want to empower your managers. You want your managers to take the bull by the horn and be the face of the organization for their respective departments. Provide them with appropriate authority to make decisions, encourage them to build respectful and trusting relationships with teams, make sure that they're fully informed on company values, strategic goals, mission, and make it known that this is the expectation, and that the expectation is for them also to communicate that with their team. Hold supervisors accountable for, the behaviors and outcomes associated with building highly engaged teams. So, give them their own engagement survey scores, have them forecast each of their team's engagement scores, and present their results to you. Also include a measurement on the manager's performance reviews about how engaged their team is and hold them accountable in that area. And last but not least, you want to provide managers with concrete behaviors, examples of behaviors that embody your values. And again, my girl Brene has developed another great resource for you, which is a list of sample behaviors that have emerged from their research on daring leadership that you can review and align to, your own core values. You also want to teach and train your managers to practice individualization in their managerial duties. So tailor their management style to align with the form of motivation that is most meaningful to, their individualized talent on their team. Find ways to weave these personal preferences into how you recognize and reward hard work, as well as how you motivate and hold employees accountable. Fostering meaningful relationships. So you also need your managers to be the catalysts in fostering these relationships. Create time and space to build bonds. Have team building activities. Provide informal, authentic, and frequent conversations, among your team. Facilitate cross-departmental relationships. Celebrate milestones as a team. Company-sponsored social events. All right, and then last but not least, day-to-day activities. So communicate, over-communicate. Just when you thought you communicated enough, communicate more. Schedule team meetings, schedule one-on-one check-ins, provide clear guidelines of success, and provide transparency into, what your expectations are and what changes are coming down the pike in the organization. Show empathy. So you need to give your full attention when someone comes to you, with struggles. Validate their emotions. You need to prioritize their health and safety. People have been through a lot over the past year and have, fears for their health and safety when they're going to work. So you need to prioritize that and make employees know in their heart that they can trust you and that you're not putting them or their family members at risk. And recognize that there are varying degrees of comfort. You also want to consider other perspective, and all of this will build loyalty. So I see we're at the hour here. I do want to just check. We didn't get any questions in, but please feel free to submit your questions last minute, and we can follow up with you afterwards offline if you'd like us to answer anything for you. And with that, I'm going to throw it back to Carly to take us home.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Sarah, for presenting today. Let you know that, yes, a recording will be sent out to you guys shortly. We wanted to talk to you about our recruiting services a little bit. These are new services that we've got here for recruitment process outsourcing. Our proven ROI, thorough approach, and expert recruiting team work closely with clients to bring them top talent. Reach out to us if you'd like to learn more. And like I had said, we are going to be sending you guys a recording of this afternoon. Thank you for attending the webinar. And please join us next week for employee retention tax credit updates, maximizing your credit and minimizing turnaround times. Have a terrific rest of your day, everybody. And thanks again for joining us.